Hey, discerning listeners, it's time to continue watching the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial. We are about to hear, I think, Dr. Hughes being cross-examined. Let's watch. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. Let's watch.
You testified yesterday that you have to give careful attention to gendered stereotypes. Correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so I guess this is good. My reaction to this before. I mean, it'd be hard to demonstrate that she was biased.
And during your testimony, you in fact paid attention to gendered stereotypes, correct?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, you said we were going to have to pay attention to gendered stereotypes, and then you testified at length where you referenced both men and women. You paid attention to those stereotypes during the course of your testimony, correct?
I mean, I don't know if this is some sort of sneaky lawyer tactic. But the question doesn't make any, I can't imagine how she's supposed to answer this. So as a colleague to colleague, I'm often in consultation, or more frequently, I am a supervisor and professor, so I am talking with a supervisee about this. And so I guess if I was trying to, interrogate someone as a colleague, which would never happen, to try to reveal or expose them, I suppose, again, which would never happen, I guess I would ask if a man came into your office claiming to be a victim and told you all the classic signs of being a victim and passed the tests that you administered, how would you feel about that? But of course, if someone did have a bias, they would detect that what that question was getting at. Well, I guess I would ask them, justify the fact that you continually referenced the victim as being the woman and the perpetrator as being the man. Justify that to me. That would put them in the position where they would have to justify it, which there is no justification for it that is legitimate in my mind. If she said, well, the vast majority of times that is the case, which is true, I would say, well, the vast majority of the time the person suffering from borderline is a woman, does that mean we always refer to people that with borderline as being female? Are you proposing that's how we talk as clinicians and researchers and forensic psychologists? Are you proposing that whenever there's a supermajority, 66% and above, we just default to the prevalent gender? Is that what you're saying? Should we refer to all single parents as women, for example? Should we refer to all couples as heterosexual? Should we refer to all humans as cisgender? Now, I've been saying from the beginning that a very common tactic used by anti-feminists is to bring up the both sides argument. They'll say, well, men are discriminated against too, and well, men are victims too, and well, women can be sexual predators as well, all that kind of stuff, and all that's true, but often the argument is trying to shut down people who are raising legitimate concerns about sexism and misogyny and the behaviors and crimes and oppression and horribleness that manifest from those underlying assumptions about gender. So they're trying to balance the playing field, and it's not actually balanced. You'll hear people do this with racism too. White people are discriminated against too. And although, yeah, it's true, but why are you bringing that up right now? Are you trying to shut this whole thing down because we acknowledge that happens, but we're saying that there's a pattern in our society? So I don't want to come across like that in any way, and maybe that's what she's fighting against. I don't know.
What I was saying was you have to pay attention to gendered stereotypes when you're conducting these evaluations. You can't assume all the time that the male is the perpetrator and the female is the victim. You have to go into the evaluation understanding that the male also could be the victim of intimate partner violence.
In fact, you're aware that there are large-scale studies that do say that IPV towards males does exist.
Of course.
Okay. And every time you referred to the characteristic of a victim of intimate partner violence yesterday, you used the pronouns she or her, didn't you?
I was using the she and her pronouns in this case because my determination was, as I stated, that Ms. Heard was the...
Right. So that's what I also thought she might say, which at the time, I thought that would be the case, that she's trying to emphasize to the jury that in this case, that gender designation, if you will, is true. But if she were a colleague or a friend or especially a supervisee, I would say that doesn't fly because you hadn't even provided the data yet. You hadn't even provided your findings yet. And for the first, I don't know, maybe hour or two of, it was a long time. It was informative lecture. I said this at the time that you could take her preamble before actually revealing her findings as a pretty good lecture on intimate partner violence and stalking and abuse and coercive control and the nuances of it and the research around it. So her talk was good, but at that she hadn't identified who was the abuser and who was the victim yet, and she was talking generally and she was being asked general questions and yet always referred to the genders as the way she did. So yeah, I mean, I guess it just depends on the jury, right? Does the jury think that that was justified and doesn't reveal gender bias with this expert witness? I don't know. Maybe we'll find out afterwards if they ever get interviewed.
Victim of intimate partner violence. That is why I was using the she, her pronouns.
You, in fact, said women gets into the relationship for all the right reasons. That's what you said. Woman gets into the relationship for all the right reasons. And then you say difficult for victim to extricate herself. You go on to say that she can and she should. Over and over, you use she, right?
I believe in this case I did because I was referencing this case where I found Miss Heard to be the victim of intimate.
She wasn't. She was talking generally, and then later she was referring to Amber and Johnny. So yeah, I mean, the more I think about it, it's like, yeah, that doesn't make any sense, right? If you're talking about victim, she was answering questions about victims in general. That was clear. She was talking about perpetrators in general, intimate partner violence in general, literally around the globe in every culture. She wasn't even saying in American culture. She was saying for human intimate partner violence. And how in the world would you interpret what she was saying as being referring to just two people on the planet? She was not yet. But I guess it just depends on what the jury thinks. She's not committing a crime or it's not unethical or anything.
Partner violence. It doesn't mean that men don't get into the relationships for all the right reasons too. I believe they do.
Nearly every time you referenced the perpetrator of IPV, you used he or him, didn't you?
Well, so the lawyer said nearly every time, and I believe it was every time.
And it goes back to the same reasoning as I'm describing my understanding and my evaluation in this matter. Of course, men can be perpetrators and victims of intimate partner violence. That's well established in the research, and that's well established in my clinical practice as well.
And I said this before, that if we're going to be inclusive, truly, and accurate, we shouldn't be saying he or she. We should just be saying people, because they're a non-binary people.
Isn't the reason that you used the pronouns that you did that you almost always testify on behalf of a woman?
That's not correct.
You don't even remember the last time you testified on behalf of a man.
Well, I don't testify on behalf of someone. I testify as to the results of my evaluation. I frequently treat and assess male victims of childhood sexual abuse who are coming into treatment for abuse by their Boy Scout leader, by their coach, by their teacher, by a trusted adult. I see them in therapy. I see them.
So you hear it, right? I mean, at first I thought, oh, okay, because the way she was talking originally yesterday, it sounded as if she had never treated a male victim of intimate partner violence, which I thought is possible, particularly if you're working at an agency that is geared towards women victims, which there are, and it's important to have that because you need to provide an ultra safe place for people to protect them and also just to create a space where they feel safe and invited and that sort of thing. I had clients who were women who were intimate partner violence victims and were in shelters. And these are places that are very hidden. They don't look like shelters. You wouldn't recognize them from the outside because the husbands are often stalking and have violent and potentially murderous intentions, particularly in the first phase of separation. So these clients wouldn't be able to come to my office because leaving the shelter was dangerous or scary. And so I would visit them in the shelter, and it was a huge ordeal because a man was in the shelter. And I totally understood it, but it was interesting to see how people reacted to me, the staff included. And there was I remember just spending a lot of time just being, I'm a therapist, I'm not, and how do you signal as a man that you're an ally? So it seemed as though she had never treated male victims of IPV, but then she says, of course I have. And I'm like, oh, okay. So, she's come across that before. But then the examples that she gave, I mean, why would she do that? It's like, I don't think she's helping herself. She said, so let's rewind that. In her examples that she gave, there was no example that she gave of a woman being abusive to her husband. Now, maybe she'll get there. But the examples she gave were not marriages, right? They were a coach, a Boy Scout leader, and I'm thinking those are probably other men, right? Okay, so now maybe the lawyer will ask, okay, fine, you've treated male victims of violence and abuse and assault. Have you ever treated a perpetrator who was a woman? Or have you ever come across that before? Because of course that happened.
Well, I don't testify on behalf of someone. I testify as to the results of my evaluation. I frequently treat and assess male victims of childhood sexual abuse who are coming into treatment for abuse by their Boy Scout leader, by their coach, by their teacher, by a trusted adult. I see them in therapy. I see them in forensic matters, in criminal cases. So I treat and evaluate men all the time.
I didn't ask you about treatment. I asked you about testimony.
Right. It could illuminate bias that, one, she's never treated, but I think the lawyer missed that detail because she did not mention marital or couple intimate partner violence. And she might have been referring to only male perpetrators. We don't know. So I would have drilled down on that a little bit. And they're about to now reveal that, or ask her if she's ever testified in court and found that the male was the victim and the female was the perpetrator. And if that's not true, then that could illuminate bias. But forensic psychologists are hired based on their reputation, and their reputation often involves from the outside what might look like bias. But say, for example, well, let's just use the reverse. So let's say that a forensic psychologist becomes known for a famous case in which they found that the male was the victim. And then future lawyers will say, well, they found that before, so maybe they'll find it in our case too, because that's what we're looking for. We have a male victim, what we believe to be a male victim of intimate partner violence. That psychologist, we know to at least be open to that idea and testifying because they've done it in the past, so let's hire them. And then that just happens over and over and over again. And the reverse is that if the legal team has a woman who is believed to be the victim, they learn that the past 10 cases that forensic psychologist has found that the husband was the victim, then they're not likely to hire that person, not because that forensic psychologist is biased, but because it just is it's a part of the marketplace, right? It's a product of the marketplace. So, and then you could imagine that over time, because you're being paid and a big part of your career and your mortgage payment depends on you being hired by lawyers, that you might become more and more convinced of your own shtick, right? That men are, like you could imagine, who knows, a forensic psychologist in that scenario having a opinion that men are, say, victims 50% of the time, which is not likely to be true. Especially after 10 years of testifying and people attacking them for bringing that up, and then they cherry pick research to back up their claim, and they start to really believe in their own thing in a way that is overblown regarding the percentages and the reality of it.
You broke out your practice between treatment and testimony. I'm not asking about treatment. When's the last time you testified on behalf of a man?
I testified recently in a deposition on behalf of a man who was traumatized because he was wrongly convicted.
At the time of your deposition 6 weeks ago, You couldn't remember a single time you had testified on behalf of a man.
I testified in my deposition that I testified in a case of a man who was wrongly convicted about 20 years and suffered physical and sexual violence in prison, and I detailed the traumatic effects of the...
Again, okay, that's good. It's pointing toward, at the very least, she can recognize that men can be traumatized. I can't imagine that she wouldn't understand that. But I think the kicker is, have you ever found or treated or met someone who, a heterosexual relationship in which the wife was the abuser? Have you ever been involved in a case like that? Because she has not mentioned that yet.
That happened on that gentleman.
All right, why don't we take a look?
Now, if she hadn't, that doesn't mean that she's biased. I'm just going to say that. As I said from the beginning, there's no way to demonstrate that the findings that she found were biased, because she has the data there. She has the testing. She has the personality testing. She looked at Dr. Curry's test results and evaluated them in a way that a lot of people would. So there's nothing out of the ordinary there.
Testifying on behalf of a male in an IPV matter.
As I stated yesterday, the very first case that I testified in was in a same-sex intimate partner violence where the man was the victim of another man.
Okay, so again, she talks about intimate partner violence, a victim being a man, but the perpetrator is a man. So I guess, I don't know. It's all about what the jury thinks, right? Does the jury think that she's biased? I was asked as a therapist to join a domestic violence treatment group of perpetrators. And so I worked side by side with the DV treatment group and learned a lot during those early in my career. And of course, I treated a lot of victims in my practice at the agency, but I didn't get a chance to come across a lot of perpetrators until I worked in this group setting. And we would have these clients in this group therapy process for a year. They were mandated to this program for a year. And if they didn't pass it, they had to take it again, or they might actually have prison time, because these were people who had been found guilty of assault on their spouses. And so what I'm saying is that in all of my time, even though it was open to any perpetrator and any victim, I don't remember ever seeing any female perpetrators. I know I didn't see any female perpetrators in that group. Now, you could argue it was the 90s, and the awareness about this was less, not only in society but also in the courtroom and in the justice system. So anyway, my point is that even if she were open, let's just say in a universe where she's totally not biased and she's absolutely open to treating or assessing that a woman is the perpetrator and treating her in the same way that she would any other gender, there's a world in which no one ever came to her because of the way our society is.
Routinely treat and assess same-sex couples where then the female can be the perpetrator of another female, and the male can be the perpetrator or a victim of his partner.
It's just so interesting that she is giving almost all other scenarios other than a heterosexual relationship in which a woman is the abuser. Now, I wonder if she's avoiding saying that because she thinks that Cross is trying to influence the jury into thinking that Amber Heard is the perpetrator when she believes that Amber Heard was not the perpetrator. And she's just avoiding even mentioning that possibility.
No, I've done this frequently. As you well know, most cases don't go to trial. I've worked on hundreds and hundreds of cases. You've limited to testimony. Many cases don't come to trial, but I've issued reports and worked on many cases of same-sex intimate partner violence where men are the victims.
But I did ask you about testimony, and I limited the question to testimony, and the only testimony that you remember is the same-sex couple, right?
There were multiple same-sex couples, I believe, that I testified
That you testified in court at trial.
I believe so, yes.
All right, but you didn't remember that in March.
I did remember that in March.
Okay. You're a professional witness, correct?
That's not correct.
No? You make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year testifying in court, correct?
Not testifying in court. I conduct thorough, comprehensive psychological evaluations of individuals who are involved in a court case.
This is relevant, I think, and the jury should know this, that they're paid. Yeah, it's true that especially if you're at her level, you can make like $500,000 just doing this sort of work. It was one of the, I guess, appeals of it when I first started to be qualified to do it. Mentors of mine would say, you know, you can make a lot of money doing this. And I was like, really? Like I could pay off my loans faster? And I got into it and just found that it's not why I became a therapist. It's not why I got into this field. God bless the people that do it, but it's not for me. So it is relevant though, right? Because if I were a layperson on the jury, I'd be like, so wait, you have two forensic psychologists found the complete opposite thing. One found personality disorders, the other one didn't. One found no PTSD, the other person did. So is the whole thing a big sham? And, you know, I don't know. It's just so, and both of them are just making a lot of money on this. So how can you trust them, right? And when you become known for a particular stick, you're a hired gun, kind of. And the legal team knows, and you know that they know, and you know that in order for them to hire you again, that you have to play ball. Does that mean you consciously become biased or unconsciously? I don't know, but anyway.
Not a limited role in this case.
Do you remember whether you used limited role in your deposition?
I don't. If you have it in front of me, you probably think I did, but sure.
And you have no independent knowledge of the facts underlying the alleged abuse, correct?
I have the knowledge of the plethora of documents that I've reviewed in this case.
No, I'm asking you your independent firsthand knowledge. You have none of that, right?
You mean whether I was there?
Yeah, you weren't there.
Of course not.
Okay.
Right. I think this is a good line of questioning. I hope that the lawyers really help to demonstrate that the findings that she had were from Amber Heard's account and people that could be argued were on her side, or people who really only heard her account, like her previous individual therapists. Now, that doesn't mean that Amber Heard is wrong, and of course, it's a totally different situation in a court of law, right, than it is in real life. When I have a client that comes to me and says that they've been abused or are being abused, I don't need to talk with other people to believe them. I just believe them. Why would they lie to me? The benefit I have as a therapist is, and I will say this often right off the bat, that I'm not going to participate in any legal proceeding, in any kind of civil case or anything. I will if by law I have to, but I'm not going to willingly go along with that. And if I am called to the stand, I'm going to provide the minimal amount of information that I'm required by law to provide, because I want you to be able to work with me knowing that the standard of confidentiality is upheld. There are exceptions to that, of course, which I won't go into, but for the most part, everything that my clients tell me is confidential, because I want them to feel safe to tell me the truth and whatever is going on, even if the truth is shameful to them or some sort of secret that they have. And if someone in that context, and I have reasons to believe that they understand that and that they wouldn't lie to me, then of course I would believe them. But in this sort of thing, it's very different, right?
And you're not testifying to the veracity, the truthfulness of any of the allegations.
Correct. I'm testifying to the consistency of the data points of all the different documents, including the psychological testing and the clinical evaluation that I conducted of Ms. Heard, and how that comports with the therapy records and all the other documents and the photos and texts that I reviewed.
I last night actually looked into the research again, because it's been a while since I've known all the research on these instruments and the K scale and the ATR and all these other things. And I'm reminded by the research that these instruments are not precise. We're talking about research that demonstrates that this particular test will find malingering or feigning or underreporting, say, 60% of the time. And that's a really good instrument. Sometimes when you have something like that, that's really great. You know, instead of just flipping a coin, at least you have some data to go off of, right? If, for example, in forensic psychology, someone claims that they were insane at the time of the crime, they were delusional and believed that aliens had invaded their town and it was their duty to kill the aliens, and so that's why they killed that person at the 7-Eleven. And those things happen. So, but they could also lie about it, right? And forensic psychology is tasked with evaluating if someone was actually mentally ill and at the time, and if that mental illness had to do with their ability to detect right from wrong and the consequences of their actions, aka insane at the time of the crime. And how can you tell if someone's lying or not? So we have these instruments that we've developed and techniques of trying to essentially detect if someone's lying, but they're not foolproof. And they've done the research on this. They've researched these instruments, backwards and forwards, and found that, there's a certain percentage rate. And to my knowledge, none of these are like 90% or 95%. It's always like 60, 70%, or I don't know, maybe even 80, but still, there's still a lot of people that are not caught by these measures. And I don't know if the lawyers even know this, because you feel like they would bring that up if they did know that, right?
And you have no personal knowledge of any abuse.
Correct, personally, correct.
Right. And all you know is what Ms. Heard self-reported to you and others.
That's not correct.
Because you did collateral interviews?
And I reviewed medical records, and I reviewed other witness statements of what they witnessed and what they saw.
Yeah. She's answering the questions really well. She's not particularly defensive. I wouldn't call her defensive. She's answering them well, to the point. She's not evading. It's all true what she's saying. She admits that she wasn't there. You
certainly can get a lot of information from one party, absolutely. And especially when it's buttressed by other documents, including 4 years of therapy records and couples therapy records, you can get a lot of information based on those documents and that contemporaneous reports of the relationship.
Oh, so she did talk to the couple therapist? Or she did get the session notes of the couple therapist? I didn't catch that. So what's the definition of assessing the relationship? To one person, it would mean you'd have to talk to both people. But to another person, they would say, no, I could get enough information without talking to Johnny Depp to make a sound conclusion that abuse was happening. Yeah, it's believable. But if I were on the jury, I would be more convinced if she had evaluated Johnny Depp as well and had talked to Johnny Depp's individual therapist and talked to Johnny Depp's friends and family. If I heard that, then I would just believe her more.
And you know that he testified that when he was treating a patient, he assumes the patient is telling the truth, correct?
I believe he said something to that effect in his deposition.
And
if he has no reason to believe otherwise, if there's no other data to believe otherwise, that your patient's not being totally honest with you, then you...
Right. This is good. The lawyer is bringing this up. I don't know if any of the intentions of cross-examination is actually getting to the jury, though, because the way he's asking the questions, I don't know if I have better ways of laying it out, and the way that Dr. Hughes is actually responding, she's just really good at this. It's not manipulative. She's just really, I don't know, she just knows how to answer these questions in a succinct and convincing way, in a way that makes it appear like she's confident and that she knows what she's doing, which is true. So what they're bringing up now is that not only is it common for therapists such as myself to just believe their clients, which I will say is a completely different matter than going to court. As I said, there's a huge gap there. And the therapist apparently in a deposition said, I always believe my clients, or something like that. And so the lawyer's trying to point out, look, if Amber Heard's lying to the therapist, and the therapist just believes it no matter what, and then you take the therapist's account through Amber Heard, that Amber Heard's account through the therapist as truthful, then doesn't that mean that you're just believing things that could be false?
Believe what they're saying.
Right. No other data to believe otherwise, but the sole thing that's happening is Ms. Heard is talking to Mr. Cohen, or Dr. Cohen.
I wouldn't say she's talking to him. She's going to him for therapy, and he's using his clinical psychological expertise to understand the connection between her symptoms and what she's reporting, what's going on in her life.
All right. But you understand that he testified that he assumes the patient is telling the truth.
Again, I understand that statement in his testimony. I have a lot more rich information of having spoken to him for 2 hours and reviewing his clinical notes.
Yeah. Does Dr. Cohen always believe clients regardless of what they're saying, regardless of the context? It's probably not true. But Dr. Cohen did, I think, mistakenly say during the deposition, and that's why you just really have to watch what you say in these kinds of situations, because it could come back to haunt you. You know, like I could see a therapist saying, yeah, I always believe my clients because I want them to feel safe. You would say that in a very pithy, short way to summarize something that's really more nuanced and complicated, when in fact, in reality, there are situations where you will be skeptical or suspicious of what a client is saying. But generally speaking, you tend to believe them because why would they lie to you? But sometimes you know that they do. But it hasn't happened in a long time. And I'm not here to figure out if someone's telling the truth. I'm here to help people. And if people want to lie to me, then they want to lie to me. And in fact, I remember people would ask me questions like, well, what do you do when a client lies to you? And it's hard to give a blanket statement to that, but it sort of implies that therapy is about catching people on things like, haha, gotcha. And that's not what therapy is. That is often how it's depicted in the media, which I always cringe at. And certainly there are therapists like that, but it's not generally what's done. It's certainly not the standard of practice or what any theory book will recommend a therapist do, aside from maybe Fritz Perls. But anyway, so for example, let's say that I have a teenage client, this would happen actually frequently, who was getting into trouble, smoking weed, dropping out of school or skipping school a lot, getting bad grades, hanging out with the quote unquote bad kids, sneaking out at night, breaking curfew, taking the parents' car, breaking into the parents' purse, taking money, shoplifting makeup from the Rite Aid, this kind of thing. And I'm talking to her, the teenager, and I say, you know, your mom says that your mom's wanted me to talk with you about, according to her, she says she discovered that you took money out of her purse. She didn't see you do it, but you're the only one that lives with her. And so $100 has gone from her purse. And so she's probably going to want to talk with you about that. Now, sometimes parents would want me to sort of blast the kid. And I'm like, that's not my job. I'm a therapist. I'm here to help. But sometimes to placate the parents, I would at least bring it up, right, and say, look, I'm not your parent. I'm not here to chastise you. You can lie to me. You can tell me the truth. It doesn't really matter to me. But know that your mom is hurt by that. Your mom might be wrong. I don't know. But if you did steal that money, you know, it's not going to help your relationship with her and all that stuff, whatever the goals are, depending. So the teenager might say to me, I never took that money. I don't know what she's talking about. She's a B word and, you know, she can go to hell. In that moment, I'm like, well, I mean, given the pattern, given the fact that you have been caught taking money from her purse before, what's the chance that this is like a gremlin took the money or the mom just misplaced it or something? And I can sometimes tell by the response from the teenager, you know, the way that I role played it would indicate to me a high likelihood of lying. A more truthful response would be like, wait, what? My mom said what? You know, a more involved response, like, no, I seriously, I didn't do it this time. Yeah, I know I've done it before, but I didn't do it. You know, of course, people can lie like that as well. But to just, you know, flat out deny it and call your mom a B word and say, okay, that's the end of that, is sometimes an indication of lying. And my job is not in that moment to say, you're lying. I know you're lying. That's not my job. It might be my job depending on the goals and depending on the objective that I'm working on, but typically it wasn't. My goal often was to help the family get along better, to reduce conflict, to help the kid make better decisions. And if they lie to me or not, which they frequently do to people, it doesn't really have any bearing on that. I might say, you know, you might be lying to me, but, you know, it's fine. You can lie to me. I'm not your authority figure, and you don't have to answer to me. I'm not your judge. I might even do that on purpose to try to demonstrate that this relationship is not like any of the other relationships that they have with teachers and parents, you know, where there's more of an authority. I don't have any authority over the kids, and I don't want the authority. So Anyway, my point is that that all plays in to the policy, the general policy, or the topic sentence that a therapist might say, which is, yeah, I tend to believe my clients. I mean, and it also includes, of course, the frequent experience in therapy, and it's one of the most, I don't know, intense but powerful experiences as a therapist when a client tells me something that they went through trauma-wise that they've never told anyone else in their life. I mean, just imagine. I mean, I get chills just thinking about experiences where I've gone through that, where a client finally feels safe enough with me and tells me about something that they went through, even in their childhood, that they've never told anyone else. Because society shames victims, because the perpetrator shamed them, because they're afraid, because they didn't know what to do with it, because they have PTSD. And in those situations, I don't want to have a shred of skepticism as they're telling me that, right? You know, the general policy is not only just believe, but believe with all of your heart and soul and be there for them. You know, you don't want, when you go to your mom and you tell them that you were bullied at school, you don't want your mom to be like, well, I don't know, I wasn't there. Like you want your mom to, oh my God, you know, we need that. And that's what therapy is for, in my opinion. So yeah, therapists tend to believe, but there are situations where we don't.
He testified he was making a leap of faith with respect to that, right? With respect to the truthfulness.
Again, that was not my understanding of speaking with him and reviewing his notes. I'm aware he testified something to that effect.
Right. I think what she's getting at is he didn't just believe, you know, just whatever Amber Heard said. There were multiple accounts that were in line with a typical presentation from a truthful victim of intimate partner violence.
And you testified yesterday that Dr. Cohen never diagnosed Ms. Heard with any personality disorders. You remember that?
Yes.
In fact, Dr. Cohen's deposition testimony reflects the fact that he doesn't make diagnoses, correct?
Correct. And I asked him specifically, did he have any indications that even if he doesn't, as his practice, use them, does she meet criteria for a personality disorder? And he told me she did not. Okay,
I was actually wondering about that. Dr. Curry referenced this. I'm still kind of confused as to what that means, but that is a little bit more data because you know, we're referring to Dr. Cohen, and Dr. Cohen reported that he did not find evidence of a personality disorder. Dr. Curry said, well, Dr. Cohen also said that he doesn't diagnose people. So the fact that he didn't find a personality disorder is just a product of his policy and his point of view. And I remember thinking at the time, well, that could mean a lot of things. That could mean that he just rejects diagnoses altogether. And if you do that, you probably particularly will reject personality disorders. And there are therapists that are like that. You have to be in private practice and take private pay typically for that kind of practice to work out, because if you're going to use insurance or Medicaid, you need to diagnose, and you can't legitimately and ethically diagnose while not believing in it. You have to believe in the diagnosis and have data to support that. So, but there are therapists out there that like that. And for me, in my practice, I gave up my connection to insurance companies a while back, and since then I haven't officially diagnosed any of my clients, but I do think in terms of some diagnoses. But to be clear, I don't live in the DSM language. Like even the personality disorder labels come way before the DSM existed, or at least the precursors to the personality type. I was wondering, is Dr. Cohen just rejecting all diagnoses, and then his opinion about whether or not she has a personality disorder or not is not useful because he wouldn't see personality disorders in anyone, regardless of how they presented? Or does he just not tend to think in terms of that and doesn't need to diagnose because he can work outside of the insurance system? But if he were to speak freely about his opinion, and he would say, well, no, I am familiar with the personality disorders, and in all of my sessions and work with her, and sometimes I do in the back of my mind think, well, I think that client does have that personality disorder. I don't put that in the record, but I do think that way sometimes. And I saw no sign of that in Amber Heard. I don't know. I feel like we're in the middle zone so far with that.
Focusing on the diagnosis, but he is treating the symptoms.
You talked about Dr. Cohen's concern for Ms. Heard's safety.
Correct.
He wasn't talking about her physical safety, was he?
Yes, he was.
No, he was talking about her emotional safety. Wasn't that what he was talking about?
He was concerned for both.
Okay.
I mean, that question's funny because even if Dr. Cohen was only concerned about her emotional safety, that still is abuse. You don't have to be physical with someone to be abusive.
Did you review, in that context, any of Paige Heard's text messages with Mr. Depp?
I'm not sure if I saw them with Mr. Depp. I do believe I saw some with Miss Heard. I mean, Miss Paige Heard, Amber Heard's mother, did talk to me about her relationship with Mr. Depp.
And she told you that she loved Johnny even after Amber alleged abuse, correct?
She did.
All right.
Yeah, I don't know. Is that supposed to sway the jury that Amber Heard's mom said that she loved Johnny Depp even though Johnny Depp was abusive? Like, I don't know what that says. It's like, is that some sort of... In fact, that would make the Amber Heard's mom's testimony or statements or more credible, right? Because she loved Johnny Depp and yet concluded that he was abusive. So I don't know if that helps the Johnny Depp team to bring that up.
What did Dr. Laurel Anderson do on behalf of Ms. Heard and Mr. Depp?
She was a couples therapist that they sought. They had 4 couples sessions. As I stated yesterday, one of them in which Mr. Depp stormed out of. She did have a long, evaluation or interview with Mr. Depp individually and with Ms. Heard individually.
Interesting. I'm glad we're getting more details that there were just 4 sessions, so it's not a lot of time. I'll tell you from my personal experience that I learn a lot past the 6-month point with couples, I'll tell you. I mean, I can certainly learn a lot in the beginning, but especially if there's a lot of conflict between the two people, which I think is true for them. 4 sessions, that'd be tough to make any judgment call. Having said that, yeah, why in the world would you not ask that therapist for the medical records, to consult with them?
And then she saw them intermittently after the May 21st, 2016 incident, and when they were filing for divorce.
So does that mean more than 4 sessions, intermittently after? I don't know.
So you didn't interview Laurel Anderson, but you know what she did? How'd you figure that out?
Because we had her redacted notes and her deposition.
All right. And you understood from her deposition that Dr. Anderson didn't believe Ms. Heard to be a victim of spousal abuse?
I believe those were her words, yes.
And you also...
Couples therapist who had a brief number of sessions concluded that Johnny Depp wasn't abusive of Amber Heard. Okay. That'd be hard to tell in couples therapy, but the data from the couples therapist would be very, very helpful, though, in terms of that person would actually have firsthand experience about how they interacted and who tended to be more aggressive and that sort of thing. But to say that they're not being abusive, one of them isn't being abusive, that'd be hard, because couples therapy is very dynamic and active. I've had sessions with non-couples, like an individual client, particularly in my early career, when I kind of am looking at the clock a lot. I'm thinking, it feels like we've been sitting here for a long time. We've only been here for 15 minutes. If I had a kid who just wasn't interested in being in therapy, that kind of thing. But couples are never like that. Every session, it's just like, I look at the clock, oh my God, we have to wrap up. And because there's so much to talk about, and they're so invested in it. The couples have so much to say, and there's so much hurt and pain and hope and reaching out to me, and so there's so much stuff going on. So to be able to assess, in fact, I will talk about this with my trainees, that when you have couples, it might take you a year before you have time to really assess people fully, right? To diagnose them, to get a genogram, to get a history, to get a childhood history, to get, all the data. And you feel better as a clinician when you know all those things. It just feels like you're not going to be surprised by anything. And but that kind of assessing takes a lot of time, and the clients typically don't want to do that. They want to, especially in a couple, they want to get right into it because they've been fighting all week and they want to talk about that. They don't want to talk about their childhood. They don't want to talk about their history. They don't want to talk about previous treatment. They don't want to talk about this stuff. So it can be hard. Now, you can absolutely, as a couples therapist, just insert that and say, like, we can't talk about that until I do my proper assessment. You can certainly do that. But I choose not to typically because I want to help them just get through the week. And the assessment details usually can wait. I mean, unless I hear something from that really indicates a strong reason for interrupting them and taking, and you could even just take 5 minutes. But my point is that the assessment quality of the couples therapist might not be of the same data set that you would as a forensic psychologist, obviously, because you don't have the time or the luxury to really get into things. But there is a lot of data that the couples therapist knows about how they were interacting with each other in that setting. And you would think that if you really wanted to gather all the data, that you would talk to that person. All right, well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.